They thought it was over the moment you went quiet. Not because they understood you, but because silence makes people uncomfortable. And uncomfortable people assume. They assumed you had nothing left to say, nothing left to prove, nothing left to become. So they relaxed. That was their first mistake. Because what they called the end was just the moment you stopped performing for them. You didn't disappear. You withdrew. There's a difference. A dangerous one. See, they were watching for noise, for reactions, explanations, breakdowns, something to confirm their version of you. But you gave them nothing. No closure, no resistance, no fight. And in that absence, they created their own story. They told themselves you were finished, that whatever made you a threat was gone. It made them feel safe. It made them feel right. And people will protect that feeling at any cost. So they doubled down on it. They spoke about you like a closed chapter, like a lesson already learned, like a name that no longer carried weight. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't see, was that your silence wasn't empty. It was precise, calculated, intentional. Because while they were busy announcing your ending, you were removing yourself from their narrative completely. No more reactions to feed on. No more access to measure you. No more version of you they could understand. And when people can't understand you, they underestimate you. Every time. That's the pattern. They need clarity to feel in control. They need visibility to feel superior. You gave them neither. So, they filled the gaps with arrogance. They thought they had already seen your peak. That whatever you were, you had already shown your best. And now? Now you were just fading. That's what they told themselves. That's what they believed. That's what they needed to believe. Because the alternative, that you were evolving, quietly, without them noticing, that would mean they misjudged you, completely. And people don't handle that well. So they laughed a little sooner, relaxed a little deeper, turned their backs a little faster, convinced the story was finished, convinced you were done. They thought it was over. They were wrong. They didn't just misunderstand you. They reduced you. Quietly. Casually. Almost effortlessly. Because that's what people do when they can't fully read someone. They simplify them. Turn depth into something manageable. Turn unpredictability into something harmless. So they labeled you too emotional, too slow, too inconsistent, or worse. They called you average, not as an insult, but as a conclusion, a final assessment of your limits. And once someone decides they've figured you out, they stop paying attention. That's where everything shifted. Because while they were busy defining you, they stopped observing you. They stopped noticing the pauses that weren't hesitation, but calculation. They stopped questioning the silence that wasn't weakness, but control. They thought your restraint meant fear, that your patience meant uncertainty, that your lack of reaction meant you had nothing left. And that belief, it gave them confidence. Dangerous confidence. The kind that makes people careless. They spoke around you like you weren't evolving. Moved around you like you weren't adapting. Acted in ways they never would have if they thought you were still a factor. Because in their minds, you weren't. You had already peaked, already failed, already faded into something predictable, something finished. And people are always most comfortable when they believe the outcome is already decided. It lets them relax. It lets them underestimate. It lets them show their true position without realizing they're being watched. Because that's the part they missed. You didn't correct them, didn't interrupt their assumptions, didn't defend your name. You let them believe it. Every version, every misjudgment, every quiet dismissal. You let it sit, You let it grow, because correcting them would have exposed you too early. And you understood something they didn't. Being underestimated isn't a setback, it's positioning. So while they locked in their perception of you, you stepped outside of it, completely. You became something they didn't account for. Not louder, not more visible, just different, unpredictable in a way they couldn't measure anymore. And that's when their confidence turned into a blind spot. They thought they knew your limits. They thought they had already seen your full range. They thought the version of you they understood was the only version that existed. They didn't realize they were preparing themselves for something they wouldn't recognize until it was already too late. #3. Hidden reality. What was actually happening. Tone blend, controlled plus surgical. Intensity, 8.5. Ending cliffhanger. While they were busy simplifying you, you were becoming harder to define. Not louder, not more visible, just more precise. Every move you didn't make was a decision. Every reaction you didn't give was control. They thought nothing was happening, because nothing was obvious. That's how surface level perception works. If it's not loud, it's not real. If it's not visible, it doesn't exist. So they missed it. All of it. They missed the way you started thinking differently. Less emotional, more exact. They missed how you stopped responding instantly and started observing patterns. Who speaks when they feel threatened? Who disappears when they're unsure? Who overcompensates when they sense a shift? You noticed everything and said nothing. Because the moment you speak, you reveal position. The moment you react, you give direction. So you stayed still, but not inactive. There's a difference they couldn't comprehend. You weren't waiting. You were recalibrating. Silently removing habits that made you predictable. Detaching from outcomes that made you reactive. Cutting ties with versions of yourself that they had already learned how to handle. Piece by piece, you became unfamiliar, even to people who thought they knew you best. And that's when the real shift started. Not outside, inside. Your priorities changed. What used to trigger you stopped. What used to matter faded. Not because you lost something, but because you saw through it. Through the noise, through the games, through the need to prove anything at all. And once you see that, you can't go back. That version of you they understood, it no longer existed. But they didn't know that. Because from the outside, everything looked the same. Same silence, same distance, same absence of reaction. But internally, everything was different. You were sharper, colder, more intentional. Not driven by emotion anymore, but by awareness. And awareness changes everything. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you choose what deserves your energy, and what doesn't even deserve your attention. They thought you were stagnant. You were evolving. They thought you had nothing left. You were just getting selective. They thought your story had ended. You had just stopped letting them read it. And the most dangerous part? They still believed they were ahead. Still believed they understood you. Still believed nothing had changed. Not realizing the version of you they were comfortable with was already gone. It didn't happen loudly. No announcement. No visible breakthrough. No moment they could point to and say, that's when it changed. That's why they missed it. Because real shifts don't ask for attention. They just happen. Quietly. Irreversibly. And by the time anyone notices, it's already too late to respond. You didn't wake up different. You became different. Slowly. Through restraint they mistook for weakness. Through silence they mistook for absence. Through distance they mistook for defeat. Every time you chose not to react, you broke a pattern. Every time you held back, you rewired control. Every time you stepped away instead of engaging, you removed yourself from their reach. And eventually, there was nothing left for them to predict. That's when the balance shifted. Not in your favor, in your control. There's a difference. Favor can be taken, control can't. Because control doesn't depend on them. It depends on you, on what you allow, what you ignore, what you no longer respond to. And you stopped responding to almost everything. Not out of fear, out of clarity. You saw the repetition in their behavior, the cycles, the tactics, different faces, same patterns. And once you recognize a pattern, it loses its power. So you stopped playing. Not dramatically, just completely. You didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't correct their perception. You let them keep it, because their version of you no longer affected your direction. That was the moment everything turned. Not when you proved something, but when you realized you didn't have to. That's the part they never anticipated. They expected resistance, pushback, some kind of reaction they could engage with. Instead, they got distance, cold, measured, final. And distance does something to people. It removes access. And without access, they lose influence. Without influence, they lose control. And when people feel that shift, even if they can't explain it, they start to react, subtly at first. A question here, a comment there. A small attempt to re-enter your space. Just to see if the old version of you is still there. Just to confirm they still understand you. But you didn't respond the same. You didn't move the same. You didn't feel the same. And that's when it hit them. Something changed. Not around you. Within you. And the version of you they were comfortable with wasn't coming back. That's when their certainty cracked. At first, they didn't panic. They adjusted. Tried to make sense of it in ways that protected their ego. Maybe you're just busy. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe nothing actually changed. Because accepting the truth that they no longer understood you was too destabilizing. So they tested it. Small things. A message that didn't get the same response. A tone that didn't trigger you like before. A move they expected you to react to, that you completely ignored. That's when the discomfort started. Not loud, not visible, but internal. Because their entire perception of you was built on predictability. They knew how to get a reaction, knew what to say, knew where your limits were. Or at least they thought they did. Now, nothing landed the same. And when patterns stop working, people don't question the pattern. They question themselves. Quietly, dangerously. They started replaying past moments, looking for clues they might have missed. When did this change? What did I overlook? Was it always like this? But the answers weren't there, because the shift didn't happen where they were looking. It happened where they weren't paying attention. Inside you. And that's what made it worse. Because they couldn't track it, couldn't measure it, couldn't reverse engineer it. So they tried something else. Pressure. Subtle at first. A little more persistence. A little more intensity. A little more presence than before. Just enough to provoke something. Anything. Because silence, when it's intentional, feels like rejection. And people don't handle rejection well, especially when they never saw it coming. So they pushed harder. But the harder they pushed, the clearer it became they were no longer in control. Not of the situation, not of you, not even of their own reactions. That's when it turned. From confusion to frustration, from frustration to obsession. Because now it wasn't about you anymore. It was about restoring their sense of control. They needed to understand you again. Needed to predict you again. Needed to feel like they still had access to you. But every attempt failed. And failure does something to people who are used to being right. It destabilizes them. Slowly at first. Then all at once. They started overthinking everything. reading into silence, questioning intentions that didn't even exist. Because when clarity disappears, the mind fills the gaps, and it rarely fills them with peace. Now they were watching you differently. Not with confidence, but with uncertainty. Not from a position of control, but from a position of doubt. And doubt spreads. It affects how they speak, how they act, how they carry themselves around you. Because deep down, they could feel it. Something had shifted permanently. Something they couldn't fix, couldn't influence, couldn't reach. And the version of you they relied on was no longer accessible. That's when it stopped being a misunderstanding and started becoming a loss. By the time they realized they were losing you, you were already gone. Not physically, not dramatically, but mentally, completely. You didn't detach in one moment. You dissolved the connections slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to hold on to. No reactions, no emotional entry points, no version of you they could reach and pull back. And the most unsettling part, you didn't look angry. You didn't look hurt. You looked unaffected. That's what made it real. Because anger can be negotiated. Silence can be broken. But indifference? Indifference closes doors without a sound. You stopped explaining yourself. Not because you couldn't, but because you understood something deeper. People who misread you once will misread your explanation too. So you gave them nothing to interpret. No defense, no correction, no access. Just distance. Clean, controlled, intentional. And in that distance, you found clarity. You started seeing people as they are, not as they present themselves. Seeing patterns without getting pulled into them. Seeing intentions without reacting to them. That changes you. Not into someone colder, but into someone harder to reach. More selective, more precise with your energy. You no longer felt the need to prove anything. Not your worth, not your growth, not your transformation. Because real evolution doesn't ask for validation. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up differently. In what you tolerate, in what you ignore, in what you walk away from without hesitation. And you started walking away more. Quietly, without explanation, without looking back. That's when your presence changed. Even in silence, it carried weight. Even in distance, it created impact. Because now, you weren't reacting to the environment. You were choosing it. Choosing who gets access. Choosing what deserves attention. Choosing when to engage, and when to disappear completely. That level of control, it unsettles people. Because they can feel it, even if they can't define it. They can feel the gap, the distance, the version of you that no longer bends, no longer explains, no longer stays where it isn't valued. And they realize they're not dealing with the same person anymore. Not the one they understood, not the one they could predict, not the one they could influence. That version is gone, replaced by something quieter, but far more dangerous. Because now, you don't need anything from them. Not attention, not validation, not even understanding. And when you reach that point, you stop being part of their world and start moving beyond it. Without noise, without warning, without leaving anything behind for them to follow. Now they talk about you differently, not openly, not directly, but you can feel it. In the pauses when your name comes up, in the way conversations shift slightly when you enter the room, in the silence that follows where noise used to be, because something about you no longer fits into the version they created. And people don't like what they can't define. So they try. They call it luck, timing, distance, change, anything except what it actually is. They won't say that they were wrong. They won't admit they misread you. Because that would mean accepting something far more unsettling. That you were always capable of this. They just didn't see it. And now they're watching from a distance they can't close, trying to understand a version of you that no longer explains itself, that no longer performs, that no longer needs to be seen to be felt. Because your presence isn't loud. It's exact. It doesn't demand attention. It alters it. You don't enter spaces the same way anymore. You don't look for reactions. You don't wait for acknowledgement. You move. And the room adjusts, subtly, almost unwillingly. Because control at this level isn't about dominance. It's about absence of need. And they can feel that. They can feel the difference between someone who wants something and someone who's already beyond wanting. That's what separates you now. Not success, not recognition, position. You're no longer inside the same game. You're outside of it. Watching patterns repeat, that no longer affect you. Watching people try the same tactics, that no longer reach you. Watching versions of yourself in others that you've already outgrown. And there's no urgency left in you, no rush to prove anything, no need to correct anything, no desire to go back and be understood. Because understanding is no longer required. You see clearly, and clarity replaces everything. It replaces doubt, replaces reaction, replaces the need to be seen by people who only recognize what's familiar. You're not familiar anymore. That's why they hesitate now. That's why they watch more carefully. That's why they speak less confidently about you. Because deep down, they know something shifted, that they can't reverse. They thought your silence was the end. They thought your absence meant collapse. They thought your distance meant defeat. They were wrong. Because while they were closing the chapter, you were rewriting the entire story, without them in it.